When life gets unpredictable, preparation matters. In medicine, it's all about staying alert, ready for whatever comes through the door. On the road, it's no different. That's why Volvo designs vehicles to help anticipate risk, reduce harm, and protect lives. The Volvo XC90's advanced safety systems inspire confident decisions wherever the road takes you. The Volvo XC90, for life. Proud sponsor of the Pit Podcast. Learn more at volvocars.ca/safety.
We think that the things that she said about Quebecers are very inappropriate, and this is not the kind of things that we should say when we are paid with public money, and when your mandate is to make sure that people are closer, are more inclined to living together, being open to other people. This is not compatible with what she should be doing instead.
Deputy Premier Geneviève Guilbeault, that was her take. That's the government's take on the appointment of Amira Elghawaby as Canada's new representative on combating Islamophobia. The call from the CAQ, from the provincial government, to remove Elghawaby from her new post. Now, the pushback comes over some previous comments by Elghawaby. She, in an opinion piece on Bill 21, she cited a poll in which she said that the majority of Quebecers appear to be swayed not by the rule of law, but by anti-Muslim sentiment. And by the way, I think we should just talk briefly about that poll. A lot of people are looking at that poll as proof that Quebecers somehow stand alone from all other Canadians when it comes to sentiment against Muslims. So listen, we have to actually look at this poll. And I want to point this out because it's so important. The way this poll is described by people like Amira Elghawaby, you would think that it shows that in the rest of Canada, it's 100% positive opinion, and in Quebec, it's 0% positive opinion. When you look at the poll, it is single-digit differences between Quebec and most of the rest of Canada. In fact, if you go Quebec versus the rest of Canada, you don't go the breakdown province by province, okay? It's 9 points. It is not 100 to 0 versus 0 to 100. It's not that. It's virtually the whole country is around 55%, including Quebec, with a neutral opinion. And then you have basically 10 points on either side, depending on where you are in the country. Some places, like Western Canada, Quebec is like 5 points away. So sometimes that poll has been mischaracterized, and that's what Amira Elghawaby did, by the way, is a mischaracterization of that poll. So here in Quebec, we've seen the massive blowback on this as well. She's also made comments saying that considering Francophones as a disadvantaged minority in Canada would make her puke. Her controversial comments, however, also go way beyond Quebec. She has been known to rail against the monarchy, Canada Day, and promoted websites that push anti-Semitism. And in the Muslim community, she's also divided people over her comments, telling secular Muslims and others that there could be no criticism of the religion. With more on this, let's go to Kaveh Shahrooz, a lawyer and senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. Kaveh, welcome to the show.
Very good to be with you. Thank you.
So let me ask you, why do you think that Amira Elghawaby is the wrong pick for this role?
So I was actually one of the first people, I think, on social media to speak up when I heard the announcements. And it was based on interactions that I'd had with her online. Some time ago, I had been invited onto the CBC to speak about Islamophobia. And the point that I made in an interview with the CBC was that Islamophobia is a term that I think is very vague because it conflates two different ideas. It conflates the idea of combating anti-Muslim sentiments, which I think is valid and should be done, but also includes in there the idea that Islam itself should not be criticized, and any criticism of it is hateful, which I think is wrong. And I put this view out there, and Ms. Elghawaby's response to it was, no, that's actually false. This analysis of yours is false. And that raised some alarms with me in that she does not recognize this distinction between, hating people and hating ideas or criticizing ideas. And that raised alarm bells for me, and I put this out there on social media. And subsequently, I've seen other statements that she's made, which I find to be very troubling.
So, do you think, when it comes to representing the Muslim community, she can do a good job based on what you've seen and how she's spoken to others? Do you think that she could possibly do a job at maybe some of those tasks, like representing the Muslim community in Canada?
Well, the problem is the term the Muslim community. This is not a monolithic group. So I'm not a practicing Muslim, but I'm somebody that was born in that tradition, and deal with a lot of people who are Muslims. My background is from Iran. And I think among my community, for example, the Iranian community that has escaped theocracy, there is a lot of, I would say, valid criticism of Islamic thought, Islamic doctrine. And I regret that, a lot of that would be captured by Ms. Elghawaby's definition of Islamophobia. And I think, the question of does she represent the interest of the Muslim community? Well, some Muslims may feel that way, but I think there are Muslim women, there are Muslim liberals who might feel very threatened by this notion of Islamophobia that she has been pushing.
Kevin, I've seen many prominent Iranian Canadians being vocal about this. Why does it make it especially touchy for Iranian Canadians and the Iranian community in general?
Well, because we have experienced Islamic government firsthand, and we have regrettably in recent years been told to be quiet because our criticism of Islamic government has been branded as Islamophobic, which I think is very regrettable. I'll give you one example. I mean, right now we're in the midst of a revolution in Iran, where Iranians, particularly Iranian women, are rising up against a religious government back in that country. And by and large, it's a very secular movement. It's a movement that doesn't vilify religion, but it says religion ought to stay out of politics. Miss Elghawaby's only statement on this movement, as far as I can tell, is one where she wrote that, this is an uprising that's targeted Muslim people, which I think is utterly false. I'm somebody that's very close to this movement, very close to these protests, and that's never been the case. So I worry that she will represent, and I think a lot of Iranian Canadians worry about this, that she will represent any sort of statement against religious government and against religious extremism as Islamophobic.
Obviously, we've been focusing on the pushback from within Quebec. Obviously, her comments about Bill 21, about Quebecers in general, about Francophone Canadians, and even questioning if they've faced discrimination here. But I want to talk about the stuff that's not related to Quebec, since you're outside of Quebec here. Stuff she said about the monarchy in Canada Day and promoting websites that push anti-Semitism. How do you view that? From your perspective as a lawyer, senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, what does that say that someone with those opinions can be named to a role like this by the Liberal government?
It's regrettable. I mean, what it tells me is that the Liberal government is dividing Canadians, or at least it's playing ethnic politics in the most cynical form. And what it tells me about her is that her views, I think, are well outside the mainstream. That's not to say that everybody has to hold the same views, but consistently, I think she's taken positions that I think most Canadians would disagree with. She has been named to a role that I think requires a lot of nuanced understanding and a lot of subtlety, and she has demonstrated over her 2-decade career that she seems not to grasp those subtleties, and that gives me a fair bit of trouble.
Kaveh, earlier on in this program, we start off our show with a panel discussion, and one of the things came up. We were discussing, the appointment of Amira Elghawaby to this post, but we also sort of brought up the topic of, does this post need to exist? In your estimation, does a post like this, does someone who's responsible as a representative on combating Islamophobia, should that be a position that exists in this country?
That's a very good question, and it's one that I struggle with. I think there should be someone that monitors and combats hatred or discrimination against Muslims. I think that's a very real thing, and I know a lot of people in the Islamic community, both liberals, more conservative Muslims, they all sense that perhaps they haven't achieved full equality. So I have no problem with that. I think this particular position and this particular person named to the role gives me trouble because, as I mentioned earlier, it conflates two very different ideas: hatred against people, which is something that ought to be combated, and opposition to ideas, which is something that is everyone's right in a liberal democratic society like Canada.
Kaveh, I got to tell you, sometimes when I want to make the most nuanced criticism of an idea, I'm very worried in a role like a broadcaster. I'm so worried that I'll get a phobia or an ism thrown at me, even if I'm just trying to make a nuanced take on an important subject. This comes up in this situation as well. It's come up over the last couple of days as we try and talk about this subject. What do you think we can do as a society to get away with that, or get away from that, and be able to have these open and honest discussions without being called Islamophobic or something else?
I think you raise a very good question, and I think you have a very real concern. Regrettably, far too many people, and I'm sorry to say Ms. Elghawaby is one of them, have tried to close the space for nuanced discussion. I think all you can do is continue to insist on nuance. And I think, criticism of religion or ideas like Islam has to be preceded by the notion that, you respect people, you respect their right to practice. The freedom of religion is something that's guaranteed, and it's, I think, central to Canada. I think once you start with that premise and then you bring in nuanced ideas, I think most Canadians would understand that and appreciate that. And I think we ought to speak out against people that try to close down that sphere of nuanced discussion.
Kaveh, thanks so much for coming on the program today, and hopefully we can catch up again in the future on other subjects. This is a real fun discussion, interesting discussion. I appreciate it.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
That's Kaveh Shahrooz, a lawyer and senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute.